The night stretched endlessly over the suburban sprawl, a quiet so deep it seemed to swallow sound itself. The only hint of life came from the faint, intermittent hum of cars slicing through the distance, their headlights mere pinpricks against the dark. Officer Luke Carter slumped in the driver's seat of his patrol car, the weight of a long, uneventful shift pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy coat. The dashboard clock glowed a dull green 11:48 p.m., and he let out a low, tired mutter. 12 more minutes. His mind was already drifting to the station, to the chipped ceramic mug waiting for him, steam curling up from a fresh pour of coffee that would chase the chill from his bones. It had been a night of nothing routine traffic stops, a stray cat darting across the road, the crackle of his radio spitting out mundane updates. He was ready to call it quits. Then, out of the stillness, a black sedan rolled into view, easing to a stop at the intersection ahead. Its tinted windows caught the streetlight's glow, reflecting it back in a faint, eerie shimmer that hid whatever lay inside. Luke's eyes narrowed. The car looked rough paint dulled by time, a jagged scratch carving a path along the rear bumper like a scar. He straightened in his seat, instincts tingling faintly, a subtle itch he couldn't ignore. When the light flicked green, the sedan didn't budge. 1 second stretched into 2, then 3. Luke's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, his brow creasing as he tilted his head to check his mirrors. No one else around. Just him and this lingering shadow of a car. Finally, it lurched forward, hesitant, tires dragging against the asphalt as it turned onto the main road. Something about that sluggish crawl set his nerves alight. Without a second thought, Luke flipped on his patrol lights, their red and blue pulse cutting through the night like a heartbeat. He eased his cruiser out behind the sedan, watching as it sped up for a fleeting moment, brake lights flaring red before it surrendered. Pulling onto the shoulder with a reluctant shudder, Luke stepped out, the cold air biting at his face as he approached, flashlight in hand. The beam danced over the car's worn license plate, rust creeping along its edges, and traced the deep scratches again. His mind churned accident, something worse. One hand hovered near his holster, a habit born from years of caution, as he rapped his knuckles against the driver's window. The glass slid down with agonizing slowness, revealing a woman whose face told a story of exhaustion and strain. Her eyes were shadowed, heavy with something unspoken, and her knuckles stood out white against the steering wheel, gripping it like a lifeline. Her lips were a thin, tight line, as if she'd bitten back a dozen words before he even spoke. Luke took her in mid-30s, a nervous energy crackling around her like static. "Good evening," he said, his voice steady but laced with authority. "I pulled you over because you sat through that green light a little too long. Everything okay?" She nodded, too fast, her head jerking like a puppet on a string. "Yes, officer, everything's fine." But her tone was brittle, her eyes refusing to meet his, darting instead to the rearview mirror. Luke tilted his head, unconvinced. "Fine, you hesitated back there." And this car, his flashlight swept over the battered bumper. "What happened here?" Her gaze flickered, a quick, nervous glance at the mirror again. "Oh, that's old damage," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I just haven't had time to fix it." It was a flimsy excuse, and Luke's years on the force had taught him to spot the cracks in stories like hers. He wasn't buying it. "License and registration, please," he said, his tone firming up. She hesitated just a beat, but enough for him to notice before fumbling with her purse. Her hands shook as she dug through it, the tremor subtle but unmistakable. Luke's eyes roamed the car's interior while she searched. The seats were threadbare, a faded stuffed animal slumped on the passenger side, and a faint whiff of gasoline hung in the air, sharp and out of place. She finally handed over the documents, her fingers brushing his for a split second, cold, unsteady. He glanced at the name, Christina Hayes. The address matched the registration. So far, so good. But her body language screamed trouble, tense, defensive, like she was bracing for a blow. "Where you headed tonight, Miss Hayes?" he asked, watching her face closely. "To a friend's house," she replied, the answer snapping out too quickly, her voice high and tight. "I had to leave home for a bit." Luke's eyes narrowed. "And why's that?" Her grip on the wheel tightened, knuckles whitening further. "Personal reasons," she muttered, barely audible. Luke straightened, stepping back from the window. "Miss Hayes." Would you mind stepping out of the vehicle for a moment? Her reaction was instant, eyes widening, lips parting as if to argue. Why? I've done nothing wrong. Her voice cracked with defiance, but there was fear there too. Ryan jagged. It's a standard check, Luke said, calm but unyielding. Please, step out of the car. For a moment, he thought she'd refuse. Her hand hovered over the seatbelt, trembling, before she finally unbuckled it with a reluctant click and pushed the door open. As she stepped into the night, the streetlight caught her wrist, a small tattoo etched into her skin, an arrow piercing a shattered clock face. The design was striking, intricate, and it snagged Luke's attention. He couldn't place its meaning, but it felt heavy, like a secret carved into her flesh. Stay right there, he said, motioning her toward the hood. She obeyed, arms crossed tight over her chest, her posture radiating unease. Luke radioed in the license plate, his voice low and clipped. As he waited, he stole another glance at Christina. She shifted on her feet, eyes darting to the empty road, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Something about her tugged at a memoria case from years back. A woman he'd stopped on a quiet night like this. She'd been nervous too, dismissive of his questions. He'd let it slide, chalked it up to a domestic spat. Days later, she'd turned up battered, barely alive. The guilt still gnawed at him, a quiet promise he'd made to himself, never again. The dispatcher's voice buzzed in his ear. Plates clean, no warrants, registered to Christina Hayes. Luke acknowledged it, but his gut told him there was more. Pop the trunk, please, he said, turning back to her, her face drained of color, eyes wide with something close to panic. Why? She stammered. It's routine, he replied, though his tone brooked no argument. She hesitated, then leaned into the car, pulling the lever with a shaky hand. The trunk clicked open, and Luke stepped around, flashlight cutting through the shadows. A single cardboard box sat in the center, its flaps tucked inward, contents spilling out in a chaotic jumble: papers, a tattered teddy bear, a threadbare blanket. But then the light caught something else, a glint of metal. He leaned closer. A small knife, its blade half wrapped in cloth, lay nestled among the mess. Beside it, a coil of rope, neatly looped. His stomach tightened. Care to explain this? He asked, stepping aside so she could see. Christina froze, her breath catching in her throat. It's nothing, she said, voice fracturing. The knife's for protection. The rope, I don't even remember putting it there. Desperation seeped into her words, a plea wrapped in fear. Luke folded his arms, his face a mask of skepticism. Miss Hayes, I'm going to need more than that. Are you in trouble? Her eyes brimmed with tears, glistening under the streetlight. I'm not a criminal, she whispered, voice trembling. I swear. I can't explain it right now. Luke held her gaze, searching for truth in the storm of her emotions. The pieces didn't fit the battered car, the box of oddities, her frantic energy. Something bigger loomed beneath the surface, dark and unspoken. All right, he said at last, his voice softening just a fraction. Close the trunk. Let's go back to the driver's side. She hesitated, then complied, her movements slow, deliberate, as if every step cost her something. As she walked, Luke caught her glancing around, eyes scanning the shadows like she expected them to move. Back at the car, he leaned against the frame, his presence steady but imposing. Miss Hayes, I'm asking one last time, is there anything you're not telling me? Her lips parted, but no sound came. She seemed to crumple inward, shoulders sagging under a weight he couldn't see. His instincts roared whatever she was hiding. It was a live wire, dangerous and unpredictable. Ma'am, he said, gentling his tone, if you're in trouble, let me help you. But if you lie to me, I can't promise things won't spiral out of control. Her eyes flicked to his, and for a fleeting second, he saw a spark of trust, fragile and flickering. But before she could speak, a distant rumble broke the silencing engine, low and growling. Approaching fast, Luke's hand instinctively dropped to his holster, his body tensing as he turned toward the sound. The night wasn't done with them yet. Christina stood by her car, the cold seeping through her thin jacket, her arms wrapped tight around herself as if they could hold her fracturing world together. Every breath felt like a battle, her chest tight with a fear she couldn't name it out to him, not yet. The officer's flashlight beam lingered in her memory, harsh and accusing, illuminating the trunk's contents like a spotlight on her shame. That knife, that rope, they weren't what he thought, but how could she explain? Her mind raced, replaying the last few hours fleeing her apartment, the sound of shattering glass still echoing in her ears, the frantic packing as she threw what little she could into that box. She hadn't meant to take the knife. It had been a reflex, a desperate grab for something to make her feel safe. The Rapesh couldn't even recall where it came from, a remnant of some forgotten errand, now twisted into evidence of a crime she hadn't committed. Luke's voice pulled her back, steady but edged with suspicion. She could feel his eyes on her, peeling back layers she'd fought to keep hidden. That tattoo on her wrist burned under his gaze, an arrow through a broken clock, a symbol of time she'd lost, of a life she'd clawed her way out of. She'd gotten it years ago, after leaving a man who'd turned love into a prison. It was her reminder, keep moving forward, no matter how shattered the past. But now, under Luke's scrutiny, it felt like a brand, marking her as something to be feared. Across the road, unseen in the shadows, a figure watched. Tommy, the gas station clerk who'd sold Christina a pack of gum an hour earlier, lingered by his beat-up truck, his shift over, but curiosity piqued. He'd noticed her hands shaking as she paid, the way she'd kept glancing over her shoulder. Now, seeing the patrol lights, he wondered what she'd done here, what had been done to her. Tommy was no stranger to trouble. He'd grown up dodging fists and broken bottles. His own scars a map of survival. Something about Christina's hunched shoulders struck a chord. Had been there, running from something too big to face alone. Luke, meanwhile, wrestled with his own thoughts. The woman in front of him wasn't a hardened criminaler fear was too real, too raw. But the signs were there, the packed box, the weapon, the evasiveness. He thought of justice, of the thin line he walked every night, protect the innocent, punish the guilty. Yet what if the guilty were victims too? Power, he knew, could twist both ways. He'd seen it in corrupt cops, in abusive spouses, in systems that crushed more than they saved. If Christina was hiding something, it wasn't just her burden, it was his now too. A test of whether he'd wield his authority to break her or lift her up. As the rumble of the approaching vehicle grew louder, Christina's heart slammed against her ribs. She knew that sound too well. It was him, the shadow she'd fled, the reason for the knife and the frantic escape. Luke turned, alert, his hand steady on his holster. Tommy, still watching, stepped closer to his truck, torn between fleeing and staying. The night held its breath, teetering on the edge of revelation. Justice, Luke thought, wasn't just catching the bad guys, it was seeing the truth beneath the fear. And for Christina, the consequences of power misused loomed closer with every second. A lesson neither of them could escape. The night stretched thin and quiet, pierced only by the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves, skittering across the pavement. Christina's hurried nod came too fast, a jerky motion that betrayed more than it concealed. "I'm fine," she muttered, her voice a threadbare whisper, "just tired." It's been a long day. Her words hung in the air, fragile and unconvincing, like a cracked glass threatening to shatter under the lightest touch. Luke, leaning against his patrol car, wasn't fooled for a second. He tilted his head, his sharp blue eyes narrowing as they traced her every twitch, every flicker of unease. "A long day, huh?" he said, his tone casual, but laced with a quiet skepticism that made her shift uncomfortably in her seat. He straightened up, crossing his arms over his chest, the fabric of his uniform pulling tight against his broad shoulders. "So where you coming from?" "Home," she shot back, the answer spilling out too quickly, too rehearsed. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles whitening as if anchoring herself to something solid. Luke raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "And where's home?" he pressed, his voice steady, probing deeper into the cracks she was desperately trying to plaster over. "Not far from here," she replied, her gaze darting to the side, avoiding the weight of his stare. She tugged nervously at the sleeve of her jacket, pulling it down over her wrist as if it could shield her from his scrutiny. Luke's instincts prickled. He'd seen this before too many times, in fact. The evasiveness, the jittery movements, the way her breath hitched just a little too often. It was the dance of someone with something to hide, and he wasn't about to let her twirl away from the spotlight. "You've been dodging me since I pulled you over," he said, his voice dropping lower, firmer. Simple questions, Christina, and you're acting like I'm asking for your life story. If there's nothing to hide, why the hesitation? Her chest rose and fell faster now, her breathing a shallow staccato that betrayed the panic simmering beneath her fragile facade. I told you, I'm tired, she snapped, her tone sharp but brittle, like a twig snapping underfoot. I don't know what you want me to say. But the loose threads of her story were unraveling faster than she could stitch them back together. Luke's gaze flicked to the rear of her car, where the bumper sagged, dented and scraped, a silent witness to some untold chaos. Then there was her demeanor fidgety, restless, her fingers twitching toward the bracelet on her wrist, tugging it tighter over a tattoo she seemed desperate to keep buried. It didn't add up. None of it did, and Luke wasn't the type to let a puzzle sit unsolved. I'll ask again, he said, his voice a calm, unyielding anchor in the storm of her nerves. Why were you just sitting there at that green light? Her lips parted, trembling as if words might spill out, but nothing came. Instead, her hand shot to the bracelet, yanking it down with a force that made the metal bite into her skin. Luke's eyes sharpened. That tattoo, it wasn't just ink. He'd seen markings like that before, etched into the skin of people tangled in dark webs. Gang runners, smugglers, souls caught in the undertow of something illicit, symbols that whispered secrets louder than words ever could. Mind if I take a closer look at that? He asked, nodding toward her wrist. No, the word burst from her, sharp and sudden, slicing through the tension like a blade. She yanked her arm back, cradling it against her chest as if he'd tried to rip it from her body. The outburst startled them both. Their eyes widened, flickering with regret, while Luke's brow furrowed, his suspicion deepening. She softened her voice, a tremor threading through it, almost pleading now. It's personal. Luke held her gaze, his face a mask of unreadable steel. Personal doesn't mean suspicious, he said evenly, his words deliberate, measured. But you're acting like it is. Christina exhaled, a shaky, ragged sound that seemed to drain the last of her strength. Her shoulders slumped, her body folding in on itself like a flower wilting under frost. I'm not doing anything wrong, she muttered, barely audible, her voice swallowed by the weight of the night. You're making it hard to believe that, Luke countered, his tone flat but piercing. A heavy silence settled between them, thick with unspoken questions and the hum of her rattled nerves. Then he spoke again, softer this time, but no less insistent. Look, Miss Hayes, I've seen this before. People scared, hiding things, swearing they're fine when they're anything but. 9 times out of 10, there's a bigger story. What's yours? Her eyes flicked up to meet his, a storm brewing behind them, defiance warring with desperation, fear clashing with a fragile resolve. And what about the 10th time? She asked, her voice breaking, a hairline fracture in her armor. Luke tilted his head, caught off guard by the question. The 10th time, he echoed, raising an eyebrow. They're just a normal person, she said, her words trembling on the edge of a sob. Someone who's scared for no reason. Luke didn't answer right away. He studied her, noting the way her hands shook, the way her story didn't align with the frantic rhythm of her pulse. She was running from something. Someone, maybe even herself. He didn't know what yet, but the truth was clawing its way to the surface, and he could feel it. Then, a faint whiff of something sharp hit his nose. What's that smell? He asked, his head snapping up, senses honing in. Christina froze, her body going rigid as if she'd been caught in a trap. What smell? She stammered, her voice climbing higher, thinner. Gasoline, Luke said, stepping back from the car. It was subtle, barely there, but unmistakable. His flashlight swept over the vehicle, tracing the dented bumper, the scratch paint, the trunk that seemed to sit just a little too low. Something was way off. Open the trunk, he said, his tone shifting from question to command. What? Her voice spiked, shrill with disbelief, her fingers tightening around the door handle as if she might fling it open and bolt into the night. You heard me. Open the trunk. Luke's words were blunt, unyielding, cutting through her panic like a knife through silk. She hesitated, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps, her eyes darting between him and the car. Why? She demanded, but the question sounded more like a plea. Because something's not adding up, he replied, his voice hard-edged now. And until I know what's going on, I'm checking everything." Her hand hovered over the latch. Trembling, her jaw clenching as if bracing for a blow she couldn't dodge, Luke watched her closely, noting every micro-movement quiver in her fingers, the way her chest heaved with each ragged breath. Finally, with a slow, reluctant motion, she reached down and pulled the lever. The trunk popped open with a soft, hollow click that seemed to echo louder than it should in the stillness. Luke moved with purpose, his flashlight cutting through the shadows as he approached the rear of the car. Christina lingered by the driver's door, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her posture a fortress of tension. Her breath came in uneven bursts, misting faintly in the cool night air. As Luke lifted the trunk lid, the beam of his light revealed a chaotic mess. A cardboard box sat crookedly in the center, its flaps bent inward like broken wings, surrounded by scraps of paper, a crumpled receipt, and a few scattered odds and ends. It looked like the aftermath of a frantic escape, as if someone had swept their life into a pile and fled without looking back. Inside the box, an old teddy bear lay slumped on top of a faded blanket, its fur matted and worn, a relic of some forgotten comfort. Next to it, loose sheets of paper fluttered slightly in the breeze. A torn letter, a grocery receipt, a scribbled note too faded to read. But it wasn't the clutter that stopped Luke cold. It was what lay beneath. A small stainless steel knife gleamed faintly in the corner, its blade dulled but still menacing, nestled beside a coiled length of thin, frayed rope. And then there was the papyrus single sheet with a dark, dried smear staining its edge, a mark that looked too much like blood to dismiss. Luke stepped back, his flashlight steady, his voice cutting through the silence. "Care to explain this?" He gestured toward the box, his tone calm but loaded with unspoken accusation. Christina's face went pale, the color leaching from her skin as if someone had pulled a plug. "It's just stuff," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm moving." "Stuff," Luke echoed, crossing his arms again, his stance unyielding. "A knife, a rope, and a blood-stained piece of paper don't exactly scream moving supplies." Her eyes widened, and she took a small, faltering step toward him, then stopped as his gaze hardened. "It's not what it looks like," she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. "The knife, it's just for opening boxes. The rope, I don't know, it was left over from something. And the blood," she faltered, her mouth opening and closing as if the right excuse might magically appear. "That's not blood," she finally managed, though her voice wavered, hollow and unconvincing. Luke bent down, using the tip of his pen to lift the stained paper, holding it up to the light. The smear was faint, faded to a rusty brown, but it was enough to set his nerves on edge. "You expect me to believe this isn't blood?" he asked, his tone sharpening. "It's probably paint," she offered weakly, her hands twisting together in front of her, her eyes pleading for him to buy the lie. "Probably," Luke's voice cut like a whip now, his patience fraying. "Miss Hayes, this isn't the kind of thing you forget. Either you know what's in your trunk, or you don't. Which is it?" Her hands shot up, palms out, a desperate shield against his questions. "I told you. I don't know. I just threw things in there and left. I wasn't paying attention to every little detail." Luke studied her, his mind racing, her nervous ticks darting eyes, the shifting feet. The way she couldn't stand still screamed guilt, or maybe fear. "This doesn't add up," he said firmly, planting his feet wider, grounding himself in the face of her crumbling story. "You're acting like someone with something to hide. Until you give me real answers, I've got no reason to think otherwise." Christina's breath hitched, a sharp, frustrated sound escaping her lips. "I'm not hiding anything," she snapped, her voice rising as her composure cracked. "I just needed to get out of there, okay?" The words burst out like a dam breaking, raw and jagged. "Out of where?" Luke pressed, seizing the opening. "Home," she shot back, her voice breaking into a sob. "I left in a hurry, all right, that's all this is. I grabbed what I could and got in the car. I didn't have time to sort through everything or think about how it looked to you." Her outburst lingered, heavy and unresolved, but Luke wasn't ready to let it go. "So you're telling me," he said slowly, his words deliberate, "that you left home in such a rush you grabbed a knife, some rope, and a random box of stuff without checking what you were taking? Does that sound reasonable to you?" Her shoulders sagged, defeat creeping into her frame. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered, her voice so soft it almost dissolved into the night. "Try me," Luke countered, his tone firm but edged with a challenge. Her lips trembled, and for a fleeting moment, he thought she might crack open, spill the truth like water from a broken vase. But then she shook her head, sealing herself shut again. "I can't, or won't," he challenged, stepping closer, his shadow falling over her. Her silence was louder than any answer, a wall he couldn't breach yet. Luke stepped back, his eyes narrowing. "All right, let's make this simple. If there's nothing dangerous or illegal here, why the hesitation? Why not just tell me what's going on?" "I told you, it's personal," she shot back, her voice rising again, raw with frustration. "Why can't you just leave it alone?" Luke's patience snapped like a taut wire. "Because, Miss Hayes, when I see signs something's not right, it's my job to ask questions. And right now, I see a lot of red flags." She turned away, her jaw tightening, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "I'm not a criminal," she muttered, the words barely audible. "Then stop acting like one," Luke said bluntly, his voice a hammer striking stone. The accusation hit her hard. She flinched, her carefully constructed mask slipping for just a second before she scrambled to pull it back into place. "I'm just trying to stay safe," she whispered, so quietly it might have been to herself. A confession slipping through the cracks. Luke paused, the vulnerability in her voice tugging at something deep within him. "Safe from what?" he asked, softening his tone just enough to coax her out. Her gaze flicked to him, then away, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice trembling, fragile as glass. "None of this matters." "It matters if you're in danger," Luke said firmly, stepping closer again. "And if you're telling me the truth, I can help you. But if you keep stonewalling me," he let the sentence hang, the unspoken consequences shimmering in the air between them. Christina's hands clutched the edge of the car, her knuckles white, her body trembling with the weight of whatever she was carrying. "You don't understand," she said finally, her voice breaking. "If I say anything, it'll just make things worse." "For who?" Luke asked, his tone sharp but laced with concern. She didn't answer, her silence a chasm he couldn't cross. Luke straightened, his resolve hardening like steel. "All right, let's get back to the driver's side. We're not done here." Christina hesitated, her body stiff with tension, her eyes darting toward the road as if calculating her odds of escape. But eventually, she moved, her steps slow and reluctant, her sneakers scuffing against the asphalt. Luke followed, his mind a whirlwind of questions. The knife, the rope, the bloodstain, they weren't random. They were fragments of a story she wouldn't or couldn't tell. And as they returned to the front of the car, the weight of justice pressed heavy on his shoulders. Power, he knew, could crush as easily as it could protect. Christina's fear was a warning, a lesson etched in the shadows of her trembling frame. Abuse of authority could silence truth, but the pursuit of it could unravel lies. Whatever she was hiding, Luke wouldn't stop until the pieces fit, because the cost of letting it slide was a burden neither of them could bear. Luke leaned against the sleek, cold metal of Christina's car, his broad arms folded tightly across his chest, his piercing gaze locked onto her trembling form. The late afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement, painting the scene in hues of orange and gray. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice steady, carrying an edge of authority softened by a trace of compassion. "I've given you time. I've waited patiently while you dodged my questions. But enough is enough. You need the truth now. If you can't give me that here, we'll take this back to the station." Her head jerked up at his words, her wide, frantic eyes flashing with raw terror as the mention of the station sliced through her fragile composure. "No," she cried, her voice quivering like a taut wire about to snap. "You can't take me there." Her chest heaved, each breath a desperate gasp, as if the air itself had turned against her. Luke didn't budge, his towering frame rooted beside the car, his expression unyielding. "Then talk to me here," he countered, his tone firm yet laced with a quiet challenge. "Because right now, every instinct I've got is screaming that something's wrong, terribly wrong, and until I figure out what it is, I'm not letting you walk away." Christina's breath came faster, her chest rising and falling in jagged bursts, as though his words had landed like a physical blow. Her hands, small and unsteady, fumbled with the hem of her worn jacket, twisting the fabric in a nervous dance. "I can't," she muttered, her voice so faint it seemed to dissolve into the chilly air. A plea spoken more to the ghosts in her mind than to the man standing before her. Luke's eyes narrowed, his patience fraying at the edges. "Can't or won't," he pressed, stepping closer, his shadow stretching over her like a looming question. "Because if you're in danger, if you're putting someone else at risk, you don't get to hide behind silence." Her knees wobbled, and she sagged against the hood of the car, the cold steel biting into her palms as she buried her face in her hands. "You don't understand," she whispered, her words muffled by the cage of her fingers, her voice cracking under the weight of unspoken pain. Luke softened, just a fraction, his tone dipping into something gentler, coaxing. "Then make me understand. Christina, if someone's threatening you, I can help you want to help. But I can't do a damn thing if you keep shutting me out." Her shoulders shook, a low, choked sob breaking free despite her efforts to hold it in. She swiped at her face with a trembling hand, but the tears spilled anyway, carving glistening trails down her pale cheeks. For a moment, Luke stood silent, watching her unravel, knowing better than to push too hard when she teetered on the edge of collapse. He'd seen this before too many times in women whose spirits had been battered, but not yet broken. Finally, her voice emerged, a fragile whisper barely audible over the rustle of the wind. "I left." Luke leaned in, straining to catch the words. "Left what?" Her confession burst forth like a dam breaking, her words tumbling over one another in a torrent of anguish. "My husband." Luke's face hardened, a flicker of anger tightening his jaw. "Why?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. She hesitated, then lifted her tear-streaked face to meet his gaze, her eyes burning with a bitter fire. "Because he's a monster," she spat, her voice thick with loathing. "Because if I didn't leave, I wasn't going to make it out alive." The weight of her words hung heavy between them, thick and suffocating, like a storm cloud ready to burst. Luke's gut had been right. There was a darkness here, far deeper than he'd imagined. "Start from the beginning," he said quietly, his voice a lifeline in the chaos of her unraveling. Christina nodded, her breath hitching as she clutched the edge of the car for support, her knuckles whitening against the chipped paint. "His name's Brian Hayes," she began, her voice trembling, but growing steadier as she forced the story out. "He wasn't always like this. When we met, he was different, kind, charming, even. I thought I'd found someone who saw me, who cared. I was so naive back then, so desperate to believe in him." She paused, her fingers tightening on the car, as if anchoring herself against the flood of memories. "But the second we got married, it all changed like a switch flipped." She swallowed hard, her gaze drifting to the horizon where the sun bled into the earth. "He controlled everything," she continued, her voice hardening with each word. "Where I went, who I spoke to, what I wore, if I even glanced at another man. He'd accuse me of betraying him, screaming, raging, calling me names I'd never heard before. And when his words weren't enough to keep me in line," her voice faltered, her hand drifting unconsciously to her arm, brushing over the faded scars hidden beneath her sleeve. Luke didn't need her to finish seeing the signs too often. "He started hitting you," he said, his tone flat, matter of fact, cutting through the silence. She nodded, her lips trembling as the memories clawed their way to the surface. "At first, it was just shoving, pushing me into walls, knocking me off balance. Then it got worse, fists, bruises I had to hide. And every time, he'd cry afterward, swear it'd never happen again. But it always did." Luke's jaw clenched, a quiet fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. "How long?" he asked, his voice low and tight. "Years," she admitted, her eyes hollow with shame. "And it wasn't just me. He used our daughter, to leveraged her against me like a weapon. If I ever dared to leave, he'd threaten to take her away, to make sure I'd never see her again." Luke's gaze sharpened. "Where's your daughter now?" Christina's answer came fast, desperate. "With my sister. I got her out first, made sure she was safe before I ran. She doesn't know where I am." And Brian, she faltered, her throat tightening. "He's probably looking for me. He always finds me, no matter how far I go, no matter how well I hide. He always finds me." Luke stepped closer, his presence solid and unwavering. "Do you think he's tracking you now?" Could this car be bugged? Her eyes widened, panic flaring anew as she glanced at the vehicle beside her, its once familiar shape now menacing in the fading light. "Don't know," she stammered. "Maybe. He's done it before, followed me, watched me. He's obsessive like that." Luke's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle of Brian Hayes, a man who wielded power like a blade, cutting down anyone who dared defy him. "You're not driving this car," he said, his tone decisive, brooking no argument. Her panic surged. "But no," he cut in sharply, his voice a wall she couldn't breach. "If there's even a chance he's tracking you, I'm not letting you take that risk. I'll get you somewhere safe." Christina froze, her body rigid with indecision, her eyes darting between Luke and the car. "And then what?" she asked, her voice breaking into jagged shards. "Even if I escape now, he'll find me again. He always does. No one's ever stopped him." Luke met her gaze, his own steady and unyielding. "You let me handle that. Your job right now is to stay alive. We'll figure out the rest together." Her lips quivered, and for the first time, a faint glimmer of hope flickered in her tear-filled eyes. "You mean that?" she whispered, barely daring to believe it. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't," he replied, his words a quiet promise. She nodded slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand, her voice a fragile thread. "Okay." Luke straightened, his mind already shifting into gear, calling for backup, arranging a tow for her car, securing a safe house. "Stay here," he instructed, striding toward his patrol car parked a few yards away, its dark silhouette stark against the dimming sky. As he opened the door and reached for the radio, he cast a glance back at Christina. She stood by her car, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her shoulders hunched as if trying to shrink into nothingness. Yet beneath her fear, Luke saw something else, a spark of defiance, a resilience forged in the fires of years of torment. This wasn't just another case for him anymore. It was a fight for justice, a stand against the kind of man who thought power gave him the right to destroy. The patrol car hummed steadily as it rolled along the deserted highway, the night closing in around them like a shroud. Christina sat rigid in the passenger seat, her arms still clasped around her torso, her breath shallow and uneven. Neither had spoken since they'd abandoned her car, but the silence was thick with unspoken dread. Luke's eyes flicked between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, his instincts prickling with unease. Then he saw a pair of headlights hovering in the distance. Too persistent, too close. "We've got company," he muttered, his jaw tightening as he gripped the steering wheel harder. Christina stiffened, her knuckles whitening as she clutched her seatbelt. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling with barely contained fear. "Car behind us," Luke said, his tone clipped, focused. "Been tailing us for too long, too close to be coincidence." Her breathing quickened, her eyes darting to the side mirror as if she could will the threat away. "It's him, isn't it?" she whispered, terror choking her words. "I don't know yet," Luke replied, his voice calm despite the storm brewing in his mind. "But we're about to find out." He eased off the gas, testing the waters, watching as the headlights grew larger, the trailing car mirroring his every move instead of passing. "That's not normal," he said under his breath, glancing at Christina. "Stay calm." "Calm?" she hissed, her voice rising with hysteria. "How am I supposed to stay calm when he could be right there?" "Focus," Luke snapped, cutting through her spiraling panic. "If it's him, losing it won't help. Trust me, I've got this." She bit her lip, nodding reluctantly, her fingers digging into her knees as Luke scanned the road ahead. Up ahead, an off-ramp veered off into a shadowed side road, flanked by dense trees. A gamble, but his best shot at shaking their pursuer. He took the exit sharply, the patrol car's tires squealing against the asphalt as it swung onto the narrower path. Christina gasped, her hand flying to the door handle for stability, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. The headlights followed without hesitation, relentless and unyielding. "It's him," Luke said grimly, his voice low and certain. What are you going to do?" she asked, her words barely audible over the roar of the engine. "Lose him," he replied, his tone resolute as he pressed the accelerator. The car surging forward into the night, the road twisted through the countryside, a ribbon of black cutting through towering trees that loomed like silent sentinels. The headlights behind them kept pace, refusing to relent. Their glare a constant threat in the mirror. Christina's breathing grew ragged, her panic clawing at her chest. "Why is he doing this? How does he always find me?" she cried, her voice breaking. Luke's response was steady, a rock in the storm. "Christina, I need you to stay with me. I'll get us out of this, but I need you focused." "Can you do that?" She nodded, her hands gripping the dashboard as the car lurched through another sharp turn. The pursuing vehicle closing in, its engine a low growl in the darkness. Luke glanced at the mirror, catching a fleeting glimpse of the driver's face, hard, unyielding, illuminated by the dashboard's cold light. Brian Hayes, a man who'd turned love into a cage and power into a weapon. In that moment, Luke understood the stakes not just for Christina, but for the countless others crushed under the weight of unchecked tyranny. Justice wasn't just a word here, it was a necessity, a reckoning for those who thought they could rule through fear. The chase was on, and Luke wasn't backing down. The man's broad shoulders seemed to carry the weight of a storm, his jaw locked tight with a fury that simmered just beneath the surface. Luke's voice cut through the tense air like a blade, low and grim. "Looks like your husband," he said, his suspicions hardening into cold certainty. Beside him, Christina went rigid, her breath catching as her wide eyes betrayed the terror clawing at her insides. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of recognition. "It's him, it's Brian." Her hands clutched at the edge of her seat, knuckles whitening as if anchoring herself against the flood of dread threatening to sweep her away. Luke's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, his grip so firm the leather creaked under his palms. "All right," he muttered, a spark of defiance flashing in his steely gaze. "Let's make this interesting." Without hesitation, he yanked the wheel hard, veering the patrol car off the smooth asphalt and onto a rugged gravel road that snaked into a shadowy thicket of trees. The tires roared against the loose earth, kicking up a chaotic spray of dirt and jagged stones that clattered against the undercarriage. Luke's jaw clenched tighter as he wrestled the vehicle through the narrow, winding path, his focus unyielding despite the jolts and sways. Behind them, Brian's car loomed like a predator, its headlights slashing through the darkness, bouncing wildly as it barreled over the uneven ground in relentless pursuit. "He's not giving up," Christina said, her voice fracturing under the strain, each word laced with a desperate edge. She pressed herself back into the seat, her chest heaving as she stole frantic glances at the rearview mirror. Luke's response was blunt, unflinching. "He won't. Guys like him don't stop until they're forced to." His eyes flicked to the road ahead, where the path split into two jagged forks. With a calculated jerk, he swung the car onto the sharper, more treacherous route, hoping the rutted terrain might finally shake their pursuer. The patrol car lurched violently as it struck a series of deep potholes, the frame shuddering with each impact, but Luke's hands remained steady, guiding it with a precision born of instinct and grit. Brian wasn't so fortunate. A piercing screech of skidding tires tore through the night, followed by the sickening crunch of metal as his car veered too sharply, slamming into the gnarled trunk of an ancient oak. The headlights flickered once, twice, then sputtered out, leaving only darkness in their wake. Luke caught the scene in the rearview mirror, his breath escaping in a sharp, controlled exhale. His shoulders eased ever so slightly, the tension unwinding like a coiled spring given a moment's reprieve. "Did we lose him?" Christina asked, her voice a fragile thread woven with equal parts hope and disbelief, as if she couldn't trust the quiet that followed. "For now," Luke replied, his tone measured, guarded. "But he's not done. Guys like him never are." He eased off the gas, guiding the car onto a smoother stretch of paved road that merged seamlessly with the highway. The hum of the engine softened, a stark contrast to the chaos they'd left behind. Christina's shoulders slumped, exhaustion overtaking her as relief warred with the lingering fear etched into her features. Yet her eyes wide, haunted, refused to let go of the panic. Suddenly, her voice sharpened, slicing through the quiet with an accusation that had been festering too long. "You said this wouldn't happen. You said I'd be safe." Luke didn't flinch, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "And you are, for the moment. But if he's tracking you this easily, he's more determined than I thought. We're going to have to rethink how we handle this." His words were steady, but beneath them lay a current of frustration at Brian at the situation, at his own inability to shield her completely. Christina's voice rose, cracking with desperation. What if he finds me again? What if this never stops? Her hands twisted together in her lap, her mind racing through a labyrinth of what-ifs she couldn't escape. Luke's tone hardened, resolute. It stops when we make it stop. You've already taken the hardest step by leaving. Now it's my job to make sure he doesn't get the chance to hurt you again. Christina stared at him, her expression a turbulent mix of fear, doubt, and a flicker of something like trust struggling to take root. You can't promise that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, testing him. Luke met her gaze briefly, his eyes unwavering. I don't make promises I can't keep. Silence settled over them, heavy and thick, as Christina wrestled with his words. For the first time, her grip on the seatbelt loosened slightly, though her fingers still hovered near it, as if ready to brace herself at any moment. The faint glow of streetlights emerged on the horizon, marking the outskirts of a small town. Luke slowed the car as they approached a weathered building, its faded sign barely legible in the dim light. Safe Haven Shelter. He pulled into the gravel lot, the tires crunching softly as he parked. We're here, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Christina hesitated, her gaze locked on the shelter's entrance, where a single bulb cast a feeble glow over the cracked steps. Her breath hitched, uncertainty rooting her to the seat. What if he finds me here? She asked, her voice trembling with the weight of a fear she couldn't shake. Luke turned to her, his expression unyielding. He won't, and even if he tries, he'll have to go through me first. She nodded, a small, reluctant gesture, but the doubt lingered in her eyes as she stepped out of the car. Luke followed, his hand brushing the holster at his hip, a silent reminder of the vigilance he refused to let slip. Not tonight, not with Brian still out there. The shelter's door groaned on its hinges as Luke pushed it open, ushering Christina inside. She stayed close, her footsteps tentative, as if the ground might give way beneath her. A middle-aged woman stood just beyond the threshold, clipboard in hand, her tired eyes sweeping over Christina with a practiced scrutiny. Her badge glinted faintly in the dim light. Elena Rodriguez, shelter coordinator. We've been expecting you, Elena said, her voice clipped and professional, devoid of warmth. Officer Carter called ahead. This way. Luke rested a hand on Christina's shoulder, a steadying gesture. You're safe here, he murmured, though his eyes lingered on Elena, noting the cool detachment in her demeanor. There was no kindness there, only a thin tolerance that set his nerves on edge. Elena led them down a narrow hallway to a cramped intake office, gesturing for Christina to sit in a stiff wooden chair. Name? She asked, pen hovering over the clipboard with mechanical precision. Christina Hayes, came the soft reply, her voice so faint it barely reached the walls. She shrank under Elena's gaze, her shoulders hunching as if to make herself smaller. Age? Elena pressed, her tone unchanging. 35. The questions continued, a relentless checklist that seemed to strip Christina bare, each answer shorter and more hesitant than the last. Then Elena's tone sharpened, cutting through the monotony. Do you have any documentation to prove your claims? Christina blinked, caught off guard. Documentation? She echoed, confusion clouding her face. Yes, Elena said, her eyes narrowing. Restraining orders, medical records, police reports, anything that confirms your story. Christina's hands trembled as she shook her head. I left in a hurry. I didn't think to bring anything like that. Her voice cracked, shame creeping into the edges. Elena's lips pressed into a tight line, her expression hardening. We've had cases before where people exaggerated their situation to gain access to our resources. Without proof, it's difficult to assess how immediate your needs are. Luke stepped forward, his presence filling the room as his voice sliced through the tension. She doesn't need to prove anything to you right now. She's here because her husband is a real threat. I've seen the fear in her eyes, and I've already dealt with him trying to follow her tonight. Isn't that enough? Elena's gaze flicked to him, defensive but unwavering. Officer, I understand your concern, but we have protocols for a reason. We can't just take everyone's word for it. Luke's jaw tightened, his patience fraying. And what happens if you're wrong? What happens if you turn her away and he finds her? Are you willing to take that risk? The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken stakes. Christina's hands clenched in her lap, her eyes darting between the two of them. Pleading silently for someone to believe her, Elena sighed, setting the clipboard down with a faint clatter. "We'll provide her with a room for the night, but she'll need to meet with one of our counselors first thing in the morning. If we determine there's a risk, we'll escalate it to local authorities." Luke nodded, curt but satisfied. "That's all I ask," as Elena stepped out to make arrangements. Christina turned to him, her voice a fragile whisper. "What if they don't believe me?" Luke's response was firm, unshakable. "They'll believe you. And even if they don't, I do." She gave a faint nod, the worry in her eyes softening, but not fading entirely. Moments later, Elena returned, leading them down another dim hallway to a small room at the far end. The door creaked open, revealing a sparse space, a single bed with a threadbare blanket, a chipped dresser, and a flickering lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. It wasn't much, but it was a fortress compared to the chaos outside. "You can stay here tonight," Elena said, her tone flat. "Don't leave the premises without notifying staff." Christina nodded silently, stepping inside as her shoulders slumped further, the weight of the night pressing down on her. The door clicked shut, and Luke lingered in the hallway, his frustration simmering like a low flame. He turned to Elena, his voice low but edged with steel. "She's scared for her life, and you're treating her like she's lying." Elena crossed her arms, unflinching. "I've worked here for 15 years, Officer Carter. I've seen everything: real victims, scammers, and everything in between. I'm just doing my job." Luke stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near growl. "And my job is to protect people like her. If something happens because you didn't take her seriously, that's on you." Elena held his gaze for a long moment, then sighed, relenting slightly. "Fine. I'll keep an extra eye on her. But you should know we can't fix everything. Some people don't want to be saved." "Christina isn't one of those people," Luke said firmly, his conviction absolute. Back in her room, Christina sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes fixed on the scuffed floor. The night replayed in her mind like a relentless Luprian's headlights piercing the dark. Luke's steady hands on the wheel, the shelter's cold indifference. She felt like a ghost, unseen and unheard, a burden no one wanted to carry. A soft knock jolted her from her thoughts. "Christina, it's me," Luke said from the other side. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the knob before cracking the door open. "What is it?" she asked, her voice hollow. Luke leaned against the frame, his presence a quiet anchor. "I just wanted to check on you, make sure you're holding up okay." She shrugged, the gesture small and defeated. "I guess." He studied her, his gaze softening. "I know this isn't easy, but you did the right thing by leaving him. That takes strength." "I don't feel strong," she admitted, tears welling in her eyes as her composure frayed. "I feel like I'm falling apart, and no one here even believes me." Luke's voice was steady, a lifeline in the storm. "I believe you, and I'll make sure they do too. But you have to meet them halfway, tell them everything, don't hold back." She hesitated, her breath catching as she weighed his words, the faint ember of hope flickering in her chest. The night stretched on, heavy with the lessons that courageousness wasn't a gift handed down but a battle fought. Step by trembling step, Ryan's pursuit was a stark reminder of power abused, a force that thrived on fear until it was met with resistance. Luke's resolve and Christina's fragile courage stood as testaments to the consequences that followed, a fragile shield against a world where trust was hard-won and safety was never guaranteed. Luke gave a slow nod, his voice steady as he murmured, "Good. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken promises. As the door clicked shut behind her, he lingered for a moment, staring at the worn wood, a flicker of doubt creeping into his chest. Then he turned, boots scuffing against the tiled floor, and made his way back to the main office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows across the room as he sank into a chair beside Elena. For the next hour, they pored over safety protocols, their voices low but urgent, piecing together a plan to keep Christina under close watch. Luke's pen scratched against the paper, his mind racing even as his hand moved methodically. But as the night stretched on, the stillness grew oppressive, and a gnawing unease settled deep in his gut like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. The next morning, The first golden threads of sunlight slipped through the blinds, painting the office in soft hues of amber. Luke was sipping lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste grounding him, when Elena's voice crackled through the radio on his desk. "Officer Carter, we've got a problem," she said, her tone sharp and clipped, slicing through the quiet. His stomach lurched, the mug nearly slipping from his grip as he pressed the receiver to his ear. "What kind of problem?" he asked, though he already feared the answer. "It's Christina," Elena replied, her words tumbling out in a rush. "She's gone." The room seemed to tilt for a moment, the air growing thick as the reality hit him. He bolted to his feet, grabbing his keys, the sunlight glinting off his patrol car as he tore out of the lot, tires squealing against the asphalt. Frustration clawed at his chest, mingling with a rising tide of worry. Christina had slipped away without a trace, and as the miles blurred past, he pieced together where she might have fled. Her file had mentioned Ashfield, her hometown, a sleepy little speck on the map, tucked away like a forgotten memory. It was the kind of place someone might run to when the world closed in, a sanctuary born of desperation. But his instinct screamed that this wasn't just fear driving her. She was chasing something Ganswer's, maybe, or a lifeline she hadn't dared mention. By the time Ashfield came into view, the sun had climbed higher, bathing the rolling hills in a warm glow. The town unfolded before him, a patchwork of weathered buildings and quiet streets that seemed to hold their breath. It was quaint but worn, the kind of place where time moved slow and secrets lingered in the cracks of crumbling brick. Luke eased his car into the town square, the engine's hum fading into the stillness as he stepped out. His eyes swept the area, sharp and searching, every nerve on edge. Christina was out there somewhere, and he couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping through his fingers. He made a beeline for the local police station, a squat, red brick building with a sign so faded it was barely legible. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and dust. A lone officer sat behind the desk, his thick mustache twitching as he sipped from a chipped mug, barely glancing up as Luke approached. "I'm Officer Luke Carter," he said, his voice firm as he flashed his badge, the metal catching the dim light. "I'm looking for a woman named Christina Hayes. She might have passed through here last night." The officer's eyes flicked to the badge, then back to his coffee, his face a mask of indifference. "Ashfield's not exactly a hot spot, Officer Carter," he drawled, leaning back in his chair. "If she's here, I haven't seen her." Luke's jaw tightened, his patience fraying like a worn rope. "She's in danger," he pressed, his tone growing harder. "Her husband's been tailing her, and she's scared out of her mind. If you've seen anything at all, now's the time to say it." The officer shrugged, his chair creaking under his weight. "Look, I get it. Domestic messes are a pain. But unless she's filed something with yous and she hasn't, me hands are tied." Luke's hands curled into fists at his sides, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous edge. "You don't get it. This guy's a threat. He's already tracked her down once. If he finds her again, it's not gonna end with a shouting match." The officer's mustache twitched again, but he only leaned back further. "I'll keep an eye out," he said, his tone flat. "But if she's not breaking laws, there's nothing for me to do." Luke's blood simmered, his gaze boring into the man. "And when she ends up hurt or worse, you'll wish you'd done more than sit there sipping that damn coffee." The officer's scowl deepened, but he stayed silent, his indifference a wall Luke couldn't breach. Without another word, Luke turned on his heel and stormed out, the door slamming shut behind him. Determination burned in his chest, a fire stoked by the stakes he couldn't ignore. His next stop was a diner just down the road, its windows fogged with steam from the griddle inside. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped in, the air thick with the scent of frying bacon and burnt toast. It was a local's haunt, the kind of place where gossip flowed as freely as the coffee. He approached the counter, where a waitress with tired eyes and a stained apron was wiping down the surface. "Excuse me," he said, pulling out his phone and showing her Christina's photo, her face frozen in a fragile smile. "Have you seen this woman?" The waitress squinted at the screen, her brow furrowing as she chewed her lip. "Yeah, she was here," she said after a pause, her voice soft but certain. "Came in late last night. Looked like she hadn't slept, in dace bags under her eyes, hands shaking. ordered a coffee, paid cash, and bolted. Didn't talk much. Luke's pulse quickened. Did she say where she was headed? The waitress shook her head, her ponytail swaying. No, but she was jittery, kept glancing over her shoulder, like she expected someone to walk in after her. Luke nodded, thanking her as he stepped back into the crisp morning air, his focus sharpening. Christina had been here, but she was moving like a ghost, desperate to stay unseen. He spent the next hour crisscrossing Ashfield, his patrol car weaving through narrow streets and past sagging motels. At every stop, gas stations, a corner store, a boarded-up bar flashed her photo, asking the same questions. Most folks shook their heads, their faces blank or wary. But at a rundown gas station on the edge of town, he struck gold. The clerk, a weary kid with acne scars and a nervous tic, peered at the picture and nodded. Yeah, I remember her. Bought some chips, a soda, and a map. Asked about places to crash nearby. He jerked a thumb toward the road stretching out of town. Told her there's a motel that wayish field in, I think. Luke's heart thudded against his ribs as he thanked the kid and peeled out. Gravel crunching under his tires. The Ashfield Inn loomed into view minutes later, a relic of faded glory with a neon sign that flickered like a dying pulse. The paint on the building peeled in long, curling strips, and the parking lot was a patchwork of potholes and weeds. Luke parked and strode to the front desk, where a bored clerk barely looked up from a dog-eared magazine. "I'm looking for someone," Luke said, sliding Christina's photo across the counter. The clerk's eyes darted to it, then back up, a spark of recognition flickering. Yeah, she checked in last night. Room 12. Luke's breath caught, relief warring with urgency. "Thanks," he muttered, already moving, his boots pounding the cracked pavement as he headed for the room. Standing outside room 12, he rapped his knuckles against the door, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Christina, it's Luke. Open up." Silence answered him, thick and heavy. He knocked again, harder this time, his voice rising. "Christina, I know you're in there. Let me in, you're not safe." After a tense beat, the lock clicked, and the door eased open just a sliver. Christina's face appeared in the gap, pale as moonlight, her eyes sunken and rimmed with exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. Luke stepped inside, shutting the door behind him, the dim room smelling of mildew and despair. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Why'd you run?" She crossed her arms, her posture defensive, though her hands trembled. "I needed space," she said, her voice cracking at the edges. "I didn't think you'd get it." She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the threadbare carpet, then whispered, "This town, it's where it all began. I thought maybe I could find something here, someone who could help." Luke's brow furrowed, his patience tempered by concern. "Help with what?" She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. "Filing charges," she admitted, her voice breaking like glass. "There's a woman, an old neighbor. She saw what Brian did to me once. I thought if I could get her to talk." Her words trailed off, swallowed by the weight of her own desperation. Luke's expression softened, though frustration simmered beneath it. "You should have told me," he said, his voice low but insistent. "Running like this, it just makes everything harder." Her eyes flashed, a spark of defiance breaking through her fear. "I didn't have a choice," she snapped, her hands balling into fists. "You think I haven't tried everything? I'm drowning, Luke. I don't know what else to do." Before he could respond, a low rumble cut through the room, sound of tires rolling over gravel outside. Luke's hand instinctively dropped to his holster as he edged toward the window. Peering through the grimy blinds, a dark sedan idled in the lot, its engine growling softly. The driver's door swung open and a man stepped out, broad-shouldered, his presence radiating a quiet, coiled menace. "Brian," Christina breathed, her voice trembling with terror. Luke's eyes narrowed, his jaw setting like stone. "Stay here," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. "Lock the door behind me." She grabbed his arm, her grip weak but desperate. "What are you gonna do? Handle it," he said, his voice a steel blade as he slipped outside. The door clicking shut behind him. Brian turned to face him, his cold eyes glinting in the weak light, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You must be the cop," he said, his voice low and laced with disdain. Think you're gonna play hero and save her from me?" Luke stood his ground, unflinching, his hand resting lightly on his weapon. "She doesn't need saving from me," he replied evenly. "But she damn well needs it from you." Brian's smirk widened, his laughter a harsh, grating sound that echoed across the lot. "You've got no idea what you're stepping into," he sneered, taking a step closer, his shadow stretching long and dark. "She's Minami wife. Nothing you do changes that." Luke's voice hardened, cutting through the tension like a knife. "She's not your property, and she's not going anywhere with you. Walk away." Brian O.B. for this gets ugly. Inside, Christina pressed herself against the door, her breath shallow, her heart hammering as Brian's voice slithered through the walls. It was a sound she knew too well, sharp, venomous, a weapon honed over years of cruelty. She squeezed her eyes shut, memories flooding back, the bruises, the screams, the nights she'd prayed for escape. And now, here was Luke, standing between her and that nightmare, his resolve the only shield she had left. Outside, Brian took another step, his sneer twisting into something darker. "You're meddling in my marriage, officer," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "She's unstable ways has been. Every mess she's in, she made herself." Luke's eyes blazed, his voice rising with controlled fury. "Don't play that game. I've seen the scars you left in her body, in her mind. I've seen the terror in her eyes. You don't get to stand there and pretend you're the victim." The air between them crackled, thick with the promise of violence, each man a coiled spring ready to snap. Brian's hands flexed at his sides, his towering frame casting a shadow that swallowed the light. Luke stood firm, his hand steady on his holster, knowing this clash was just the first ripple in a much deeper tidion that would test the fragile line between justice and vengeance, and the devastating cost of power unchecked. The air was thick with tension as Brian's face twisted into a storm of fury, his eyes narrowing into slits that gleamed with something dark and dangerous. For a fleeting second, Luke thought he saw a flicker of hesitation, a crack in Brian's armor, but it vanished as quickly as it came. With a guttural snarl, Brian launched himself forward, his fists cutting through the air like wild, untamed things. Luke's instincts surged to life, honed by years of training, and he shifted his weight with practiced ease, dodging the first clumsy swing. His hands moved fast, seizing Brian's outstretched arm in a grip of iron, twisting it with a sharp, deliberate motion that sent a jolt of pain racing up Brian's limb. Off balance and enraged, Brian stumbled, his breath hissing through clenched teeth as he swung his other fist in a desperate arc toward Luke's ribs. The blow landed with a dull thud, a burst of pain blooming across Luke's side. But he swallowed it down, his jaw tightening as he refused to yield an inch. "You're making a mistake," Brian growled, his voice low and venomous, straining against the hold Luke had locked around his arm. His words dripped with arrogance, as though he still believed he could muscle his way out of this, just as he always had. Luke's eyes flashed with defiance, his own anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "The only mistake here," he shot back, his voice cutting like steel, "is you thinking you can intimidate your way through this." With a sudden, forceful shove, he drove Brian backward, slamming him against the hood of a rusted sedan parked nearby. The metal groaned under the impact, and Brian's breath exploded from his lungs in a ragged gasp. For a moment, he writhed like a trapped animal, twisting violently in Luke's grasp until, with a furious jerk, he broke free. Spinning around, he lashed out with a vicious swing, his fist crashing into Luke's jaw. Pain erupted across Luke's face, sharp and searing, and he staggered back, the world tilting for a heartbeat. But he steadied himself, planting his feet firmly on the cracked asphalt, his resolve unshaken. "Stay down, Brian," Luke commanded, his voice ringing out with authority, slicing through the chaotic night. "This ends now." But Brian's eyes blazed with a manic fire, his chest heaving as he roared. "Not until she comes with me," he charged again, a bull driven by rage and desperation, his heavy footsteps pounding against the ground. This time, Luke didn't hesitate. He ducked beneath Brian's wild swing, his movements fluid and precise, and drove his elbow into Brian's ribs with a force that echoed through the empty parking lot. The air rushed out of Brian in a choked wheeze, and as he doubled over, clutching his side, Luke swept his legs out from under him in one swift motion. Brian hit the ground hard, the impact reverberating through the pavement, a cloud of dust rising around him. Before he could recover, Luke was on him, pressing a knee into his back and yanking his arms behind him. The cold click of handcuffs snapping into place punctuated the night, a sound that felt like justice finally taking root. "You're under arrest," Luke said, his tone icy and unyielding, "for assault, harassment, and whatever else I can pin on you by the time we're done." Brian thrashed weakly beneath him, his breaths coming in shallow, furious bursts. "You think this is over?" He spat, his voice hoarse but still laced with defiance. "She'll come back. She always does. She's nothing without me." His words hung in the air, heavy with delusion, until a new voice pierced the tension like a beacon through fog. Luke's head snapped up, and Brian froze, both of them turning toward the motel room's open doorway. There stood Christina, framed by the dim yellow light spilling out from within, her silhouette fragile yet unyielding. Her face was ghostly pale, her cheeks streaked with the faint shimmer of tears, but her ice-toast eyes burned with a fierce, unquenchable resolve that Luke hadn't glimpsed before. "Christina, baby," Brian cooed, his tone shifting in an instant, dripping with a sickening sweetness that made Luke's stomach turn. "This is all a misunderstanding. He's trying to turn you against me. You can't believe a word he says." His voice was a desperate plea masked as tenderness, a manipulator's last gambit. Christina stepped forward, her hands trembling at her sides, but her voice emerged steady, cutting through his lies like a blade through silk. "No, Brian, this isn't a misunderstanding. It's the truth. I'm done letting you control me." Her words landed with a weight that seemed to shake the very air, each syllable a declaration of her reclaimed freedom. Brian's face contorted, rage twisting his features into something monstrous. "Don't do this," he hissed, his tone darkening. "You'll regret it." But Christina shook her head, her movements slow and deliberate, as though shedding years of fear with every gesture. "The only thing I regret," she said, her voice rising with quiet power, "is not leaving you sooner." For the first time, Luke saw Brian falter. The bravado, the swagger, the unshakable belief in his own dominance had all drained from him like water through a sieve. His shoulders slumped, his mouth opened as if to retort, but no words came. "You'll regret this," he muttered again, though the venom had leached from his voice, leaving it hollow and weak. Luke tightened his grip on the cuffs and hauled Brian to his feet, the man's resistance reduced to a feeble squirm. "Not as much as you will," Luke said coldly. His eyes locked on Brian's as he marched him toward the patrol car, parked under a flickering streetlight. Christina remained where she stood, rooted to the spot, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles gleamed white in the dimness. When Luke returned after securing Brian in the back seat, she exhaled a shaky breath, the sound trembling with the weight of her liberation. "Are you okay?" Luke asked, his voice softening, a gentle contrast to the sharpness he'd wielded moments before. She nodded, though tears spilled freely down her cheeks now, tracing paths through the dust and exhaustion etched into her skin. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to say that to him," she whispered, her voice cracking under the strain of her emotions. Luke offered her a small, steadying smile. "You did more than that. You stood up to him. That takes courage more than most people ever find." She lifted her gaze to meet his, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of gratitude and bone-deep weariness. "What happens now?" she asked, the question fragile but laced with a thread of hope. "Now," Luke replied, his tone firm yet reassuring, "we make sure he can't hurt you again." A faint spark flickered in her expression, the first ember of possibility she'd allowed herself to feel in years. For Christina, the night marked not just an ending, but the tentative beginning of a life she might finally claim as her own. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the grimy blinds of Luke's precinct office, casting jagged shadows across the cluttered desk where he sat. Papers sprawled in chaotic heaps, arrest reports, witness protection forms, background checks, each one a lifeline he was weaving for Christina. His phone was pressed to his ear, his voice clipped and urgent as he spoke to a representative from a victim assistance agency. "She needs immediate entry into the witness protection program," he insisted, his fingers drumming against the desk's edge. "This isn't just domestic violence. Brian's dangerous, and he's not acting alone." The woman on the other end responded with measured calm. "We'll expedite the process, but she'll need to relocate." "Is she ready for that?" Luke's gaze flicked to Christina, seated nearby in a worn chair. Her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her nails dug crescent moons into her palms. She was listening, her face a mask of quiet terror, her eyes darting between him and the floor as though searching for an anchor. "We'll make it happen," Luke said into the phone, his tone resolute. "Just get everything ready on your end." As the call ended, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his broad shoulders hunching slightly under the weight of the moment. "Christina," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "this is the best way to keep you safe. A fresh start, far away from Brian and anyone tied to him." She hesitated, her breath catching as she spoke, her words barely above a whisper. "And my daughter," Luke nodded, his expression softening. "She'll be included. You'll both be protected." Tears welled in her eyes, glistening like fragile glass. But she swiped them away with a quick, determined motion. "It's just a lot," she murmured, her lips trembling. "Leaving everything me job, my sister, everything I've ever known." Luke leaned closer, his voice steady as a rock in a storm. "I know it's overwhelming, but this is about your life, your daughter's life. It's about surviving." Her lips quivered as she nodded, a spark of resolve breaking through the fog of her fear. "I'll do it," she said, the words fragile but firm, a vow to herself as much as to him. Before Luke could respond, his phone buzzed again, the sharp sound slicing through the quiet. He glanced at the screen detective Laura Graves and answered swiftly. "Luke, we've got a problem," Laura's voice crackled through, brisk and edged with urgency. "Brian's got connections we didn't see coming. One of his old associates showed up at the precinct this morning, asking about Christina." Luke's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles whitening. "What kind of questions?" he demanded. "Where she's being held, how long Brian's locked up," Laura replied. The guy didn't say much, but he wasn't here for pleasantries. "He's digging." "Did you get a name?" Luke pressed, his mind already racing. "Ethan Miles," Laura said. "He's got a rap sheet, drug trafficking, illegal weapons. Not someone you want poking around." Luke cursed under his breath, the pieces snapping into place with grim clarity. "That confirms it. Brian's not alone in this. It gets worse," Laura added, her voice dropping. "We checked Brian's confiscated phone. He made multiple calls to Ethan in the days before this mess." Luke's thoughts churned, a storm of calculations and worst-case scenarios. If Ethan was still out there, Christina wasn't just in danger from Brian, she was caught in a broader, more sinister web, and the threads were tightening fast. "Keep an eye on him," Luke instructed. "I'll get Christina moved immediately." "Be careful," Laura warned, her tone grave. "These guys don't play fair." Hanging up, Luke turned to Christina, who had gone rigid, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "There's more going on than we thought," he said, his voice steady despite the urgency pulsing through him. "Brian's got dangerous people working with him. We need to move now." Her face drained of color, her hands shaking as she clutched the arms of her chair. "You mean they're coming after me?" she whispered, her voice trembling on the edge of panic. "They might try," Luke admitted, meeting her gaze with unflinching honesty. "But we're not going to let that happen. Pack what you need, we're leaving within the hour." She nodded, her movements jerky as she rose and began gathering her meager belongings, a worn duffel bag, a photo of her daughter, a frayed jacket. Despite the fear etched into every line of her body, there was a new strength in her actions, a quiet determination to outrun the shadows that had haunted her for so long. Luke drove her to a safe house on the town's outskirts, a nondescript building cloaked in dusk's fading light. A tall fence encircled it, topped with coiled barbed wire, and surveillance cameras glinted like watchful eyes. Inside, a counselor with a clipboard and a tired smile greeted them, ushering Christina into a small, sterile room. "You'll get new identities," the woman explained, her voice clinical yet kind. "A new city, a clean slate, but it means cutting ties with your old life completely." Christina listened, her fingers twisting the strap of her bag, her apprehension palpable. When the counselor stepped out, she turned to Luke, her voice soft and uncertain. "Will it really stop him?" Luke met her gaze, his expression unwavering. It'll make it damn near impossible for him to find you. But you have to follow the rule, no contact with anyone from before unless the program clears it. She nodded slowly, her breath hitching. I just want this to be over, she whispered, a plea wrapped in exhaustion. It will be, Luke assured her, his tone a lifeline in the dark. We just have to stay ahead of them. As night deepened, Luke's phone buzzed again, the sound jarring in the safe house's stillness. It was Laura, her voice grim. More bad news, Luke. Ethan's been spotted near Ashfield. He's not being subtle, looks like he's trying to flush her out. Luke's jaw clenched, his free hand curling into a fist. Does he know where she is? Not yet, Laura replied. But it's only a matter of time if we don't move fast. Luke glanced at Christina, huddled in the corner, her eyes weary but alert. A soldier braced for battle she never wanted. We're moving her tonight, he said into the phone. Good call, Laura replied. Just watch your back. Ethan's the type who doesn't care who gets hurt. Hanging up, Luke crossed the room to Christina, his steps purposeful. Change of plans, he said, his voice firm. We're not staying. We're heading to the relocation center tonight. She rose without a word, her hands steady now, fueled by a resolve that had taken root amidst the chaos. Together, they stepped into the night, the weight of justice and the consequences of power's abuse trailing behind them. A lesson carved into every heartbeat of their escape. Christina's heart thudded in her chest, her wide eyes reflecting the dim glow of the dashboard as Luke's voice cut through the silence of the night. Brian's people are closing in, he said, his tone low but laced with urgency. They're too close for comfort. We can't afford to gamble with your safety. Her throat tightened, a lump forming as she swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking deep into her bones. She gave a small, shaky nod, her voice trapped somewhere between fear and resolve. Okay. She managed, her breath catching. Let's get out of here. The drive to the relocation center was a nerve-wracking journey, every mile stretching into an eternity. Luke gripped the steering wheel with one hand, his knuckles whitening under the strain, while his other hand hovered near the holster strapped to his side, fingers twitching as if anticipating the need to draw his weapon at any moment. His sharp eyes flicked constantly between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. Each car that passed felt like a predator lurking in the dark, its headlights glaring like eyes ready to pounce. Every turn of the wheel carried the unspoken threat of an ambush, and the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Christina sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, fingers digging into her palms until crescent-shaped marks bloomed beneath her nails. She didn't dare speak, afraid that even the sound of her voice might shatter the fragile thread of control she clung to. Her mind raced with a torrent of emotions, fear gnawing at her gut, guilt twisting her heart, and a desperate hope flickering somewhere deep within. Luke didn't need words to feel the storm brewing inside her. Her silence screamed louder than any cry for help ever could. As they approached the center, Luke's phone buzzed sharply, jolting them both. He glanced at the screen, his jaw unclenching slightly as he read the message from Laura, a fellow officer whose calm competence he'd come to rely on. Ethan's been nabbed near the safe house, the text read. He's got no clue we've already moved her. You've got a little room to breathe now. Luke let out a slow, measured breath, the tight coil of tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. But the relief was fleeting. He knew Brian and his crew weren't the type to back down. They were relentless, driven by a toxic blend of pride and vengeance. And this small victory was just a pause, not an end. The relocation center came into view, its gated lot a stark silhouette against the night sky. Luke pulled the patrol car to a stop with practiced precision, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as he shifted into park. He stepped out first, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud, and motioned for Christina to follow. She hesitated for a heartbeat, her legs trembling as she climbed out, the cool air biting at her skin. Inside, the staff greeted her with quiet professionalism, their voices steady as they outlined the next steps of her relocation: new identity, new address, a new life. Christina nodded along, her mind a haze of exhaustion and disbelief, while Luke lingered nearby, his presence a solid anchor in the chaos. He double-checked every detail, his sharp eyes catching things the staff might have missed. ensuring no loose ends could unravel her escape. Before he turned to leave, Christina's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. Her voice quivered. Fragile but earnest. "Luke, wait. Thank you for everything. I don't think I'd still be breathing if it weren't for you." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, gratitude and terror warring within her. Luke's expression softened, though his posture remained steady. "You don't owe me any thanks," he said, his voice low and firm. "You're the one who had the guts to take that first step. I just made sure you didn't fall along the way." He gave her a small, reassuring nod before stepping back, the weight of his duty pulling him toward the car. As he slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, a nagging unease gnawed at him. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Christina was safe for now, tucked away behind the center's unassuming walls. But Brian's shadow loomed larger than ever. Luke's mind churned as he steered back toward the station, already mapping out his next moves, securing her placement, filing the paperwork, digging deeper into Brian's network to rip it apart piece by piece. The quiet hum of the patrol car was interrupted by a sudden crackle from the radio, and Laura's voice burst through, tight with alarm. "Officer Carter, we've got a problem." Brian's slipped custody. Ethan staged a distraction during transport. They are both in the wind. Luke's grip on the wheel tightened until his knuckles ached, a curse slipping through his gritted teeth. "When?" he barked, his pulse spiking. "About an hour ago," Laura replied, her tone clipped. "We think they're heading your way. Be careful." Without a second thought, Luke yanked the wheel hard, the car screeching as it spun in a tight arc back toward the center. His phone buzzed again, a security alert from the facility. Christina's location had been breached. Dread coiled in his gut, cold and heavy, as he floored the accelerator, the engine roaring in response. Headlights flared in his rearview mirror, closing in fast. Luke's heart pounded as he recognized the vehicle, a black SUV, its reckless swerves cutting through the night like a blade. Brian was behind the wheel, his face a mask of pure, unhinged rage, while Ethan clung to the passenger side. His hand braced against the dashboard as the vehicle lurched wildly. "They're here," Luke muttered, his voice a low growl as he pushed the patrol car to its limits. The SUV surged forward, its bumper kissing the back of Luke's car with a sickening crunch. He swerved onto the shoulder, tires kicking up dust, but the SUV matched his pace, relentless in its pursuit. Luke snatched the radio, his voice cutting through the static. "This is Officer Carter. I'm in pursuit of a black sub-suspects Brian Hayes and Ethan Miles. Request immediate backup on Route 17. The dispatcher's response was swift. "Copy that. Officer Carter. Units are en route." Brian's SUV veered closer, its metal frame gleaming under the streetlights as it tried to shove Luke off the road. "Not today," Luke snarled, wrenching the wheel to dodge the next attack. Brian overcorrected, the SUV fishtailing wildly before he wrestled it back under control, and slammed into Luke's bumper again. The impact rattled Luke's teeth, the patrol car skidding as he fought to keep it steady. Brian's voice roared through the night as he leaned out the window, his words dripping with venom. "She's mine. You think you can take her from me?" Beside him, Ethan fumbled in the glove box, pulling out a crowbar. He leaned out his window, swinging it with wild abandon. The first strike missed, slicing through empty air, but the second connected with a shattering crash, sending Luke's side mirror exploding into a spray of glass across the asphalt. Luke didn't flinch, his focus razor-sharp. He slammed the brakes, the patrol car lurching to a sudden halt, forcing the SUV to overshoot. Seizing the moment, he gunned the engine, sliding behind Brian's vehicle with lethal precision. "You're mine now," Luke muttered, his eyes locked on the SUV. With a calculated tap, he executed a pit maneuver, sending the SUV spinning off the road in a chaotic whirl of dust and gravel. It skidded into a shallow ditch, its engine sputtering as it came to a jagged stop. Luke pulled over, stepping out with his weapon drawn, the cool metal steady in his grip. The SUV's doors flew open, and Brian and Ethan stumbled out, their faces twisted with fury and desperation. "Stay where you are." Luke's command sliced through the night, sharp and unyielding. Brian laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that grated against the stillness, raising his hands but taking a defiant step forward. "You really think you can stop me? I've got nothing left to lose. Luke's eyes narrowed, his voice cold as steel. Take another step, and you'll see just how wrong you are. Ethan, emboldened by Brian's bravado, lunged toward the patrol car, reaching for something inside. Luke fired a warning shot into the dirt, the crack echoing like thunder. Ethan froze, his bravado crumbling as he raised his hands, dropping to his knees under the weight of Luke's glare. Brian's gaze darted to the SUV, calculating his next move. Luke caught it instantly. Don't even think about it, he warned, but Brian ignored him, diving back into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, tires spinning in the muck as he tried to pull free. Luke didn't hesitate, aimed low and fired, the bullet tearing through the rear tire with a satisfying pop. The SUV jolted, lurching forward before stalling completely. Brian slammed the steering wheel in a fit of rage, then threw the door open and charged at Luke like a cornered animal. The collision sent them both crashing to the ground, the air rushing from Luke's lungs as Brian's weight pinned him. You think you're better than me? Brian snarled, his hands clamping around Luke's throat, fingers digging in with desperate strength. You don't know what she's done to me. Luke's vision blurred, but he summoned every ounce of willpower, driving a knee into Brian's side. The grip loosened, and with a surge of adrenaline, Luke flipped them over, pinning Brian beneath him. This ends now, he growled, landing a solid punch to Brian's jaw. Blood sprayed from Brian's mouth, his defiance flickering, but refusing to die. You can't stop me, he spat, his voice ragged. Luke reached for his cuffs, snapping them onto Brian's wrists with a final, resounding click. I just did, he said, his tone flat but triumphant. Flashing lights flooded the scene as backup arrived, officers spilling from their cars to secure Ethan and haul Brian into custody. Luke rose to his feet, breathing hard, watching as Brian was shoved into a squad car, his face a twisted mask of rage and defeat. One of the officers, a burly man named Daniels, who'd seen his share of rough nights, approached Luke. You good, Carter? He asked, clapping a hand on his shoulder. Luke wiped blood from his lip, nodding. Yeah, it's done. Back at the relocation center, Christina sat in a small, sterile room, her nerves frayed to threads. Every creak of the building, every distant sound, made her flinch, her hands twisting the hem of her shirt until it frayed. When Luke walked in, his uniform torn and streaked with dirt, she nearly collapsed with relief. His calm presence steadied her racing heart. It's over, he said simply, his voice a lifeline in the storm. Brian's locked up. He won't come after you again. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable, as the weight of her fear finally broke. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. For everything. Luke shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You don't need to thank me. You've got a clean slate, now make it count. She stepped out of the office, clutching a folder of documents that held the keys to her new life, a new name, a new home, a chance to start over. It felt unreal, like she was peeling away the battered shell of her past and stepping into something fragile, but beautiful, a life free of chains. Jana, the shelter director, stood by the door, her warm brown eyes crinkling with a smile. She was a woman who'd seen countless stories like Christina's, her empathy a quiet strength. Your apartment's ready, she said, her voice soft but encouraging. It's not much, but it's yours. A fresh beginning. Christina nodded, her throat tight. Thank you, she murmured, the words barely audible. As they walked to the transport vehicle idling outside, she caught her reflection in the window, a stranger staring back, her features softened by the promise of hope. The apartment waiting for her was modest, its walls bare and its floors scuffed, but it was clean, a blank canvas for the life she could build. She stood in the doorway, her breath catching as she took it all in. For the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of something she'd almost forgotten: freedom. Luke's actions that night were more than just a rescue, they were a stark lesson in justice, a reminder that power, when twisted and abused, inevitably meets its reckoning. Brian's downfall wasn't just his defeat, it was a mirror held up to the consequences of his tyranny, a warning etched in the dust of Route 17. For Christina, it was a chance to reclaim her life, to step out of the shadows and into the light. And for Luke, it was a testament to the quiet strength of doing what's right, no matter the cost. In a modest corner of the world, a single room stretched itself to fulfill multiple roles. It was Christina's bedroom, her sanctuary and her living space all at once. A tiny kitchen huddled in one corner, its worn countertops bearing the promise of new beginnings. Beyond the window, a quiet street unfurled a stillness so profound it felt like a balm against the chaos she'd known for too long. For the first time in years, Christina exhaled fully, the tightness in her chest loosening as she stood there, gazing out at the world that no longer seemed poised to strike. Safety wasn't just a place now, it was a fragile, precious feeling she cradled within her. The days that followed draped themselves over her like a soft blanket, each one weaving her deeper into a routine that felt both foreign and vital. Mornings unfurled with the slow rhythm of counseling sessions at the shelter, a space where the air grew heavy with shared pain. Each meeting drained her, pulling at the threads of her spirit until she felt unraveled, yet she knew this unraveling was necessary. Sitting in a circle of folding chairs, she poured out her story, the years of abuse that had carved hollows into her soul, the fear that had once pinned her in place like a butterfly under glass, and the raw, trembling courage it had taken to break free. "I felt like I wasn't enough," she confessed one day, her voice cracking under the weight of the admission. "Everything he said about me, believed it, that I was nothing without him." Across from her, Marcy, the counselor, leaned forward, her eyes warm but piercing. She was a woman whose kindness seemed to radiate from a deep well of understanding, her graying hair pulled back in a loose bun that softened her sharp features. "That's what abusers do, Christina," she said gently. "They plant those lies to keep you small. But look at you, you're here. You took the hardest step when you walked away. Now it's about building a life that's yours, one you truly deserve." Christina's fingers brushed against the tears streaking her cheeks, and she nodded, a flicker of resolve igniting within her. The future was a vast, uncharted sea, but for the first time, she felt the stirrings of belief that she could navigate it. Luke, the officer who'd first guided her to this fragile new start, didn't fade into the background as she'd expected. Though his official role in her case had ended, his voice became a steady tether, reaching her through the phone with a regularity that surprised her. One evening, as she unpacked a box of donated kitchen supplies, mismatched plates, and a dented kettle that somehow felt like treasure, his call came through. "Hey," he said, his tone easy but laced with care. "How's the new place treating you?" She paused, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, as she ran her fingers over the chipped edge of a mug. "It's good," she replied. Quiet's good," Luke said, and she could hear the faint grin in his voice. "You need that right now." Those conversations blossomed into something essential, a lifeline she hadn't known she'd needed. They talked about her counseling breakthroughs, her tentative dreams for what lay ahead, and even the small, ordinary joys like the way she'd burned her first attempt at soup and laughed at the smoky disaster. "Do you cook much?" Luke asked one night, his curiosity genuine. She chuckled, a soft sound that felt like it belonged to someone else. "Not really. Ryan hated my cooking, so I stopped trying." Luke's response came quick and warm. "Well, now you can make whatever you want. And if it's awful, no one's there to judge." The lightness of his words sparked a laugh that rolled through her, deep and unrestrained, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. It was a crack in the wall her past had built around her, a moment where the shadows loosened their grip. As weeks stretched into months, Christina took tentative steps toward reclaiming the pieces of herself she'd lost. She found a part-time job at a local bookstore, a haven of creaking shelves and the musty scent of old paper. Her first day was a storm of nervous fumbled with the register, her hands trembling as she rang up a customer buying a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. Self-doubt whispered in her ear, familiar and cruel. But then Mr. Lee, the shop's owner, stepped in. He was an older man with a gentle stoop and eyes that crinkled with patience, his voice a steady anchor. "You're doing fine," he assured her, resting a hand briefly on her shoulder. "Everyone's a mess on their first day." By the time her shift ended, a spark of pride glowed within her. She was working, earning her own money, stitching her life back together thread by fragile thread. Each day at the store bolstered her confidence, and soon she turned her attention to her apartment. She painted the walls a soft blue, the color of a calm sky, and hung photos of her daughter bright. Candid shots that captured a love she'd fought to protect. She added small paintings from a local art fair, their bold strokes a quiet rebellion against the emptiness she'd once known. One evening, curled on her couch with a steaming cup of tea, she caught herself smiling not out of habit or to mask her pain, but because a genuine warmth had settled into her bones. Yet Brian's shadow lingered, a specter that refused to fully retreat. His venomous words echoed in her nightmares, and his fists haunted the edges of her sleep, jolting her awake with a racing heart. On her walks home from the bookstore, she'd glance over her shoulder, half expecting his silhouette in the fading light. During one session, Marcy handed her a notebook and a challenge: write a letter to him not to send. But for you, Christina froze, the pen hovering over the blank page as her mind churned. What do I even say? She murmured, her voice tight. Marcy's gaze softened. Whatever you need to. This isn't about him, it's about you. The words came haltingly at first, each one a jagged shard of memory, but soon they spilled out like a flood. She wrote of the pain he'd inflicted, the fear that had shackled her, and the strength she'd unearthed despite him. Tears blurred the ink as they fell, but when she finished, folding the letter and passing it to Marcy, she felt lighter, unburdened, as if she'd shed a layer of his control. Marcy's smile was quiet but triumphant. You're letting go, Christina. That's what this is. One afternoon, Luke appeared at her door unannounced, a small box in his hands and a sheepish grin on his face. Thought you might need this, he said, offering it to her. Inside gleamed a set of kitchen knives, their polished blades catching the light. Christina arched an eyebrow, a playful spark in her eyes. Are you saying my cooking's dangerous? Luke laughed, a deep, easy sound that filled the room. No. But I figured it's time you had something that's yours, no baggage attached. Her fingers traced the smooth handles, and gratitude swelled within her. Thank you, Luke, for everything. He shrugged, his simplicity disarming. Anytime. As he left, something shifted inside her, a realization that she was no longer just a survivor of her past, but a woman stepping boldly into her future. The sun dipped low over the neighborhood, bathing the streets in a golden haze as Christina arranged pamphlets on a table. In the Victim Support Center's modest office, the shelter had become more than a refuge. It had gifted her purpose. She'd started leading workshops, sharing her story with women whose eyes mirrored the terror she'd once known. That afternoon, she stood before a small group, their faces a mosaic of grief and resilience. You're not alone, she began, her voice steady and clear. I've been where you were rescued, unsure, convinced I'd never break free. But I'm here to tell you that you can. You deserve more than just surviving, you deserve to live. A woman in the front row, her hands twisting a tissue, raised a trembling hand. How do you stop being afraid? Christina inhaled deeply, the question stirring her own memories. You don't, not at first, but fear doesn't have to own you. Little by little, you take that power back, and it starts with reaching out. The woman nodded, tears shimmering, and Christina felt a fierce resolve ignite within her. If she could light even one path out of darkness, every scar she bore would hold meaning. Miles away, Luke sat at his cluttered desk in the bustling station, the hum of radios and voices swirling around him. He was finishing paperwork for another case, but his mind drifted to Christina. Her bravery had etched itself into him, rekindling a purpose he'd nearly lost amid the grind of his work. His phone bootsayed a message from her. Workshop went well. Thank you for believing in me. A smile tugged at his lips as he replied, you did the hard work. Keep going, you're making a difference. Setting the phone down, he felt his own determination sharpen. Christina's journey had taught him that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about compassion, about standing firm when power was abused, and about helping someone reclaim what was stolen from them. A week later, Christina stepped into the station, her presence unexpected but welcome. Luke looked up, surprise softening into a grin. Christina, what brings you here? She met his gaze, her voice steady but thick with feeling. I wanted to thank you in person, for everything. He shook his head, deflecting gently. You don't have to thank me. You took control of your life, I just gave you a nudge. Her smile was faint but real. It was more than a nudge. You believed in me when no one else did. That changed everything. Luke's expression grew serious, his words deliberate. "You proved how strong you are, Edomi. To yourself, that strength is yours now. No one can take it away." They stood there, the weight of her journey settling into something lighter, something hopeful. As she left, Luke watched her go, a quiet pride swelling within him. Her path wouldn't be easy, but she'd found her voice a power born from the ashes of abuse, a testament to the consequences of unchecked cruelty, and a beacon of justice for those still fighting to be free. As Christina returned to her daily tasks, the voices of those she had begun to assist lingered in her thoughts, resonating like a soft, persistent melody. Each word of gratitude, every shaky confession of pain they shared with her, swirled in her mind, painting a vivid picture of lives intertwined by struggle and survival. For the first time, a profound realization washed over Hirsch was no longer just a solitary figure battling her own demons. She was a thread woven into something vast and meaningful, a tapestry of resilient self-survivors and allies allocated by an unspoken bond. The weight of that connection settled into her chest, both heavy and uplifting, as if she had finally found a place where she belonged. Months later, the air buzzed with anticipation as Christina stood poised before a sea of faces at a citywide awareness event. Her fingers curled tightly round the edges of the podium, the cool wood grounding her as her heart raced beneath her ribcage. She could feel the flutter of nerves like fragile wings beating against her resolve. But as her eyes swept across the crowded room, those jitters began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, steady courage. "My name is Christina Hayes," she declared, her voice cutting through the hum of the audience with a clarity that surprised even herself. "And I'm a survivor." The words carried a weight she hadn't anticipated, each syllable laced with the raw, unfiltered truth of her journey. She didn't shy away from the ugliness of her past as she spoke. No, she leaned into it, laying bare the scars of her story, not to drown in old wounds, but to extend a lifeline to those still trapped in their own shadows. "I'm standing here today because someone believed in me," she continued, her gaze drifting through the throng until it landed on Luke, his familiar face a beacon of warmth amid the blur of strangers. "But more than that, because I learned to believe in myself. If I can climb out of that darkness, so can you." Her words hung in the air, a fragile yet fierce promise, and the room responded with a thunderous wave of applause. Yet Christina barely registered the sound. Her focus remained unshaken, her heart tethered to the purpose that had taken root within her. This moment wasn't about the cheers, it was the opening page of a new chapter, one where her identity wasn't shackled to the chains of yesterday, but defined by the light she could offer to others. As the event drew to a close, Christina stepped outside into the crisp embrace of the night, the city sprawling before her like a canvas of twinkling stars scattered across a dark velvet sky. Luke joined her, his presence a steady comfort as they stood side by side, the cool breeze tugging gently at their clothes. The distant hum of traffic blended with the faint rustle of leaves, wrapping them in a cocoon of calm after the storm of emotions inside. "So," Luke said, his voice soft yet curious, breaking the stillness between them. "What's next for you?" Christina turned to him, and a smile bloomed across her face, not the tentative, fleeting kind she'd worn in darker days, but one forged from hard-earned peace, radiating a quiet strength. "Whatever I decide," she replied, her tone carrying a newfound certainty. "For the first time, I'm not afraid of what lies ahead." Luke's eyes crinkled at the corners, his expression glowing with a warmth that mirrored her own. "That's the best answer I could have hoped for," he said, his voice thick with pride and something deeper relief, perhaps, that the woman beside him had found her footing at last. They stood there in companionable silence, the city's pulse thrumming faintly in the background. The weight of everything they'd endured, years of fear, uncertainty, and battles fought in the shadow, seemed to melt away, dissolving into the night like mist under the morning sun. The road stretching before them was uncharted, a winding path cloaked in mystery. But to Christina and Luke, it shimmered with the promise of possibility. Their journey hadn't merely been about fleeing danger, it had been a grueling, transformative odyssey toward uncovering their own resilience, purpose, and hope. The scars etched into their pasts would never fully fade, those jagged lines of pain, and loss were part of them now that they no longer held the power to dictate what came next. In that quiet moment, they both understood a profound truth. A single act of belief, one outstretched hand in the dark, could ripple outward, igniting a chain of change that stretched far beyond themselves. It was a lesson in justice, and not the cold, punitive kind, but a gentler, more human sort, where healing triumphed over retribution. And it was a warning, too, about the consequences of power misused, how it could crush spirits and shatter lives, yet how those same lives could rise again when nurtured by compassion. Luke, too, carried his own story, though he rarely spoke of it. A man of few words, he'd been a rock for Christina, but beneath his calm exterior lay a well of his own struggles. Years ago, he'd watched helplessly as someone he loved slipped through his fingers, lost to a system that wielded authority like a blunt weapon rather than a shield. That failure had haunted him, gnawing at his edges until he'd found a purpose in helping others like Christina. Standing beside her now, he felt a flicker of redemption, not loud or triumphant, but subtle, like the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. He'd seen what happened when power turned tyrant, but he'd also witnessed the quiet miracle of what it could build when wielded with care. Together, they had weathered storms that might have broken lesser spirits. There had been nights when Christina's resolve faltered, when she'd sat alone in her small apartment, the walls closing in as memories clawed at her throat. She'd traced the faint scars on her wrists, reminders of a time when surrender seemed easier than fighting. But then Luke would call, his voice steady through the phone, or a stranger she'd helped would send a shaky thank you note, and she'd find the strength to keep going. Those small, seemingly insignificant gestures had stitched her back together, piece by fragile piece, until she stood whole again, or at least, whole enough to face the world. The city lights glimmered in the distance, each one a tiny testament to lives carrying on despite the dark. Christina tilted her head back, letting the night air fill her lungs, and felt a surge of gratitude for the people who'd pulled her from the abyss, not just Luke, but the countless others at that event, their faces a mosaic of pain and hope mirroring her own. She thought of the woman in the front row, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce, clutching a crumpled tissue as Christina spoke, of the older man in the back, his weathered hands trembling as he nodded along, as if her words had unlocked something long buried. These were the souls she'd reached, the ones who reminded her that her survival wasn't just for herself. It was a torch to light the way for others. In the end, their story wasn't about erasing the past or rewriting it into something neat and painless. It was about standing tall amid the wreckage, about choosing to build something beautiful from the ashes. For Christina, it meant embracing a future unshaped by fear. For Luke, it meant honoring the ghosts of his failures by lifting others up. Together, they'd learned that true justice wasn't about punishment, it was about restoration, about giving the powerless a voice and the broken a chance to mend. And as they stood there, the city sprawling before them like an open book, they knew the chapters ahead would be theirs to write, flawed, messy, and gloriously alive with hope.